You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Well, welcome to the microphone, David Ashton-Lewis, Supreme Court Judge.
Well, welcome to all the listeners, and as always, thank you for having me.
Well, you wanted to start with a correction. We've got a great little show this morning, but we'll start with that correction and then we'll move into that.
Because I know that people in Fiji, ever since that interview that we did on the 29th of May, are now listening. So I want to correct something else. Where in that interview I said 72 recommendations. I was speaking live and it was 72 areas that I investigated into that led to about 9 or 10 recommendations, which are contained in the Commission of Inquiry report, which I'm advised during the week has been leaked to the public. Now, I'm sort of two minds in that. In one way, I'm happy because the public have always had a right to know this. And both the President and the Prime Minister have taken their time for reasons that I understand, but it's now over 6 weeks and people are starting to making up conspiracy theories, and it was not that. It was that the Prime Minister wanted to make sure that certain areas were dealt with. For instance, that the report be handed to the police, and anyone listening in Fiji will know that the police now have had meetings with the Prime Minister and they are starting to investigate matters that I raised. It's sad when people who are not trained in law write comments such as, I've been found guilty by Justice Ashton-Lewis. No one's been found guilty. My report stated, on the evidence before me, on the balance of probabilities, I believe that certain named people lied under oath. I believe, no court has found it, I believe they've lied under oath, they've committed obstruction of justice, and they have perverted the course of justice. It's up to the police, who now are investigating, to make a determination whether people should be charged, and their files then go to the Director of Public Prosecutions. So it's always sad when the commentariat who make comments on matters that they are not educated in and they do not know. For instance, I heard also that I found things, I was allowed to accept hearsay under the Commission of Inquiries Act, which in a court of law you can't do unless it comes within certain strictly defined exceptions. And I said, I can accept hearsay. And then I said, and I can also, if I want, accept hearsay on hearsay. Well, for those listening, I accepted no hearsay on hearsay. I did accept hearsay evidence and I made a finding in that. So I would encourage everyone, because I understand it's being reported everywhere now, I would encourage anyone, read the report rather than what someone tells you or what you think. And if you're not trained in law, then you will need to speak to suitably qualified lawyers to have things that I've said clarified.
Look, it's interesting every time we touch discussions such as these or anything to do with our own government for the sake of things. We've got to bear in mind the bedrock principle, and that is that the government of the day has been put in place to manage the affairs of the country on behalf of the people. Protect the people's interests in the country, and that is first and foremost.
Well, you not only do I think you're right, you are right from a constitutional, parliamentary, governmental position. Now, governments are bound with an obligation, and the Prime Minister and the President are aware of that obligation and have agreed that the matter should be released to the public, but it's up to them to mark the time. Now, someone's either got into... Well, this report has been leaked everywhere from what I can see, but someone has leaked it now to the press and the public, and they can read it now online. Well, while it's sad, it's probably sped up the process that the public have a right to know. I'm sad because the people who appeared in the Commission of Inquiry were entitled to a full copy of the report on the day that it was handed in to both the President and the Prime Minister. Now, that hasn't happened, and I'm sad over that, but if they're reading the press, that they now have access to the full report. And I hope eventually they will get hard copies of that full report.
All right. Yes. Well, David...
So I hope I've clarified that for people.
Well, it's very clear indeed to me. But again, at the end of the day, I'm sure it'll be clearer once you've read the report.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. The topic of the day was a historical look at Iran and Israel. Yeah. And just running over it again, I know we have discussed the area in the past, but it's always good for a refresh. And it has been a area of turmoil for a long period of time. Yes. So, David, I'm over to you.
Oh, over to me. Well, look, they're both amazing cultures and with amazing histories. Let's deal with Iran first.
Used to be Persia, right?
It did. It used to be Persia. And the Shah, and his title was Shahanshah, King of Kings. And Persia has a great history biblically. Cyrus, Darius, in treatment of the Jews. I think it was Cyrus who released the Jews from Persia and helped let them go back and build their homeland. So Persia was a tremendously cultured society, beautiful history, beautiful art, beautiful architecture and writing. I mean, Khalil Gibran, great Persian writer, beautiful literature, and like any nations, once Islam came after 632 burst out, the Persians adopted it, and the Persians took it as their religion, and that is still the case today, 1400 years later. And we saw that in 1979, the Shah of Iran was overthrown. Now, the one problem is that, yes, you look at the beauty, and older Australians my age will remember when the Empress Farah came to Australia, I think in about 1958, between 58 and 60, and I can remember seeing photographs of her, and a graceful woman. But her husband didn't come, the last Shah, he stayed. Muhammad Pahlavi Reza, I think was his name. Muhammad Reza Pahlavi or Muhammad Pahlavi Reza, R-E-Z-A. Now, he didn't come, but he owned racehorses in stables here in New South Wales. And they had a close relationship with Australia, and Australia the same. The sad thing is, when you have societies that have these hierarchies, and usually it's in monarchical societies, the small elite at the top, the aristocrats, the equivalents of earls, dukes, marquises, have everything. Mm-hmm. And the little bleeders, you and I, if we were there, we just scrub every day to get enough food to feed our families and to live. Now, the corruption in Iran was pretty devastating. And Ayatollah Khomeini, he, being an Ayatollah, that translates to being the eye of God. And he was a great teacher. And he fled Iran, I don't know, but I think it was in the 60s, and went to France. And he built up a following in France, teaching the Quran, establishing the Hadith, which is the traditions over 1,300 years of great scholars lecturing what certain passages of the Quran mean, what they don't mean. And so he, and anyone who's interested, look up and get access, because Islam is a great topic today in the West. So look up, and the great writers, there are two. One is Ibn, I'll probably give the wrong name. I've just bought the two. One's a a 12-volume series. The other is a 14-volume, and one's Bukhari, Said Bukhari, considered to be by many the leading scholar in the interpretation. And we have that in Christianity. We had it with what is called in Rome the magisterium. So anyway, Khomeini was in Paris, and there was death penalty put upon him by the Shah's regime. Anyway, he didn't stop speaking out. He got massive supporters, and of course those who can remember February 1979, there was the Islamic Revolution in Iran. The Shah was deposed. Terrible. Usually it always happens, like in the French Revolution. All the aristocrats who were in Iran caught and executed. And so the country fell into a bit of disarray, but it's been controlled since 1979 by religious men. So their concept of what we have in the West, the separation of church and state, and that religion is a private matter, that doesn't exist in Iran and other Islamic states because of their understanding of Sharia law. And that is the law of God, and it must apply to everyone. So we have that, and they build up over what? How many years now? 79? 46 years. We've had that religious theocracy. Now, I'm sure there are cracks in it, but usually powers, whether it's a monarchical regime, they have secret police. Now, Iran has the Revolutionary Guard, and their job is to patrol the streets of Tehran, Tabriz, other places, and pull up young ladies if they're not appropriately dressed, and pull up men if they're not acting in accordance with Islamic teaching. And so they are quite feared, but are also hated by those who want a freer breath in Iran. And so that battle's been going on for 46 years. And usually these leaders realise we better let go of the reins a bit or they'll revolt badly against us. And there is word in intelligence out of Iran that was growing over these 46 years and will eventually get to a point where possibly the mullahs, that is the imams, will be overthrown. Doesn't appear to be any likelihood of that now, but what has muddied the waters now is this current conflict between Iran and Israel, and I'll get to Israel in a minute. Now, Iran has come out, at least, and overtly and openly launched missile attacks in Jerusalem, Haifa, Tel Aviv, with a reasonable degree of effectiveness, although I read yesterday from intelligence that the severity and depth of Iranian missile attacks is weakening.
Look, I think their support of Hezbollah and delivering missiles and military support there, and because of the pounding they've copped over the last little while, I think they're depleted in their military might.
Oh, look, they must be, because also, as if you watched the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying, we simply had reached the point where their enriching of uranium was getting very advanced and they weren't far away from creating a bomb. We couldn't let that happen because we know if they get the bomb, what will probably happen.
Let's start and move to the Israeli side and do the Israeli history.
So we have in Iran, they are in an open war with Israel. All right, Israel. Now, I mean, you've got to be careful when you speak. Israel came into being at the behest of the United Nations on May the 14th, 1948. Now, Jews had always occupied that area, or if you like, Semitic people who adhered not to the other Semitic Arabs, adhered to a belief which we now know is the Judeo-Old Testament belief. So finally, and they'd lived there for over 2,000 years, more than that, but finally in 1948, because of the horror of what had happened under the Nazis, the world galvanized and said they've got to have their own state. So they carved out this small area in what really is just south of the Transjordan, which became Jordan, and then east became Syria, and then further south, Egypt, of course. And they carved out the state of Israel. Well, we know since 1948 there have been conflicts there constantly, and open wars, 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, where the armed forces of Israel severely clobbered the armed forces of Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, everyone. And it appears, as I once heard, I can't remember, I think it might have been Yitzhak Rabin was the first man to say it. If the Arabs lay down their arms, there will be peace. If we lay down our arms, Israel will not exist. And I think that's probably a fair assessment. So Israel, as always, fought for its existence. And so now we have today the Iran, Israel, Houthi, Israel, Hezbollah, Israel, Hamas, Israel, Syria conflict. And this state of about, 7 million I think now they have there, is really punching above its weight. I have no doubt that Israel has a nuclear weapon. It neither confirms nor denies it. But you can't have a people in a state that is so threatened and yet so technologically more advanced that wouldn't have access to it. And who knows, possibly the West, mainly the US, has given them the technologies, even given them bombs. What we do know is that Israel's fighting for its life, and we know that Iran is fighting to eradicate it.
The reason behind it, I was about to call you Hilton, David.
Well, the reason behind it
is it religion, or is it because you weren't there before 1948?
Look, I think it's a bit of both. I've heard Arabs say Israelis have never lived in this area in the Middle East. Well, every bit of history, I'm reading now, a 5,000-year-old history of Palestine, and I'm up to about 3000 BC. Now, there were no real Jews then. They were just all Arabic people, all Semitic people. And then when the Jews came about with the belief of their God Yahweh, that's about 2000 BC. And so they started believing. Now, it appears up until probably the end of the First World War, everyone survived and everyone got on well. But then the British intervened, and they were given authority by the League of Nations, and it's the Balfour Declaration that did something for which we're becoming much more aware of today. The great empire powers, France, Great Britain, and other nations, they believed they had a right to carve up the globe. And they did. And that goes right back to the 1500s, when the Pope gave certain parts of Southeast Asia to the Spanish and other parts to the Portuguese.
Right.
And so that's why we have Timor, which was a Portuguese enclave from 1513. So you had that. And so the Balfour Declaration did the same thing. It carved up certain areas of the Middle East and said, well, you Arabs are there, you Palestinian Arabs, it's called Jordan, because there's always been the push that the Palestinians have a state. It's called Jordan. Well, the Palestinians and other Arab states, Egypt and Libya and Morocco, all reject that. And so when you look at why is there such rejection, for the simple reason what we're seeing playing out today is that Islamic states, led mainly now by Iran, have a strong belief there is no place for Jews in the Middle East, and they should all be sent away, or they don't say this, or killed. And that's what, again, this claim from the river to the sea. I've seen two versions of that. I've seen some very devout Muslim women say, yes, that does mean that that area from the Jordan River down to the sea is Palestinian, but shared with the Jews. We'll live harmoniously together. To others saying, no, it means the total removal of the State of Israel and the total removal, they can go back to Europe, they can go wherever they want, Jewish people. So this is really what this comes down to. One side claiming we've been here for over 2,000 years, another side saying, no, you haven't. And you've got learned scholars on each side of that debate supporting that argument. Now, when you get learned people supporting differing views, that's when you can become cynical of any of them.
That's right.
And it's now being fought out on a battlefield.
The shame of it is the climate change debate has a similar ilk, doesn't it? You've got experts saying one thing, experts saying the other. Another. And unfortunately, there's money in the middle, so that you don't know which is the truth.
And so Israel, when you look at it, though, and we as Australians raised in this country, as I say to people, how many times have you seen F-18 fighter jets flying 200 feet above your head, just under supersonic, massive boom, massive noise? How many times have you seen tanks rolling down George Street, Brisbane, and on every corner an Australian soldier with over his shoulder is a modern-day submachine gun? You don't.
Yes.
And you don't see it because we are, for all our moaning about Labor or Liberal, we're a well-governed people. Now, when you look and use us, Canada, Australia, don't even use the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, what's the one place you can find in the Middle East that has a parliament, that has Arabs sitting on the Supreme Court of Israel, Arabs, Muslims, that has Arabs in the parliament representing Arab area? I think there's about 2 million Arabs in Israel, and the majority of them are Muslim.
Okay.
Some of them are Christians. So when you look at that and think, now, can I find that in Jordan, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas? Can I find it in Egypt? I can't. And why? Because both sides are recalcitrant. To me, the only way there will ever be peace in that region of the planet is the Palestinian/Arab people accept we will never defeat Israel on the battlefield. We will never be able to kick them out. Let's try getting on with them. Let's try learning from them.
Yes.
And the other side, the Israelis, saying, you've got to live within the borders created for you by the United Nations. Admittedly, you've expanded above them, not for your fault, to protect yourself. But if there's a commitment from the Palestinian Arab people, we will observe your right to exist. But can you see it happening, Colin?
Look, it's always very difficult when
it is.
You pour religion in, as well as you also pour in a long feud over you weren't meant to have that land.
Yes.
It was ours once upon a time.
And religion poisons things. As for all its good. Look at that Jim Jones in the late 70s down in, I've forgotten where, Brazil somewhere. What was he? Having this cult following. Look, and he poisoned them all.
You can find extremism in every religion.
You can.
And I know that Christianity may not like to recognise it, but the Ku Klux Klan would be a good example of a Christian organisation who's extremist.
Well, see, unfortunately, religion, when it takes hold in a heart and a mind, needs to be very carefully, that's the person themselves. I need to be careful with this because there will be people who hate Christianity and want nothing to do with it. Well, I can't join them, but I can say, look, I don't respect you with that belief, but I do respect that you have a right to exist. And so if I go back to what I say so many times, from the 1540s onwards, Western Christianity developed and strengthened the doctrine of the separation of church and state, that the church will no longer control lives. It's a private matter. Now, you've got in Iran and in other countries where they're exactly like we were in the 1540s. No, religion controls every aspect of life. Now, to someone raised in our society, things like the place of women in a strictly Sharia society, no Australian, man or woman, I believe, would ever accept it.
Yes. All right, David, we're out of time.
All right. Yep.
We'll pick up another conversation next Thursday. Thank you very much for your time again this morning.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4CRB.com.